lot of people will report, particularly with the internet today, that they feel as if they're like glued to their chair all the time, or that real life is occurring on the internet. Nora Ephron's sister, Delia, recently was on the radio saying that she has the experience of coming home to two young children who she adores, and she immediately goes on the internet, and she was on the internet 45 minutes before she left home at work, because that's when she feels like kind of most alive. And I can relate to that. And that's kind of a little messed up if you don't want to be neglecting your children. Well, I got into this work originally from research I started the very first year when I was a graduate student, looking at how people experienced television in the flow of their everyday life. And we used a beeper technology where we would beep people at intervals, and they would write down what they were doing, how they were feeling, and so on. And I was able to look at this stuff, and I was able to show and demonstrate like what kinds of days people experienced when they would watch more at night. And the answer to that was they felt not very good at work. They had a really bad day at work. I found that people who didn't have a good tolerance for what I called unstructured time watched more TV. And I would say this is probably true for use of the internet too. If you don't feel comfortable with yourself and you need to fill up that time when you're by yourself and you don't have anything else to do, then what are you going to do? You're going to gravitate to the easiest, most inexpensive medium that was ever invented, which is virtually free, television, and fill up your mind with something else. So it's a kind of form of escapism. Where it becomes problematic is when people start neglecting their work life, their family life, their social life, and they're just blobbing out in front of the tube. More recently, for 15 years now, we've been hearing about so-called internet addiction. And you'll probably find more people saying, gee, I think I got a problem with that now. And I reported to a Rutgers conference last year based on an article that I did maybe 7 or 8 years ago, we were looking at Rutgers undergraduates, who I think are fairly typical of undergraduates at a good, large public university. And we were able to show that somewhere between about 8 and 14% of male students, particularly in their first year, reported that they felt that maybe their grades had suffered a bit in their first year because they were up at 4 in the morning doing multiple chat user games and emailing with their friends back in high school. And I got the idea for some of that article because there's a small college out in Missouri, William Woods College, and they actually started paying students $2,500 reduction in tuition a year if they would go to student activities on campus. In other words, they couldn't get people out of their dorm rooms, and they couldn't have like a little chamber orchestra play or a play, or they couldn't have a rock band even on the campus because everybody's going, like this. So that was the beginning of the psychological work that I've done, and then I've reported a lot on what are the potential symptoms of television addiction. I think a lot of people think, and I think correctly, that an addiction implies a biological dependence, that if you didn't have it, you're going to be, in the vernacular, in street language, jonesing for this drug. Like with heroin or alcohol, you would get the DTs, or you would get the heebie-jeebies, or you get some bad thing. I don't think that happens with television. I mean, we just have too many examples. Everybody, a lot of people go away for 2 weeks to summer camp, and there are all kinds of fun things they do at summer camp in the summer. They don't have any TV for 2 weeks. They don't miss it at all. I mean, they go into complete withdrawal, but there's no withdrawal. There's no withdrawal symptoms. Whereas if you were a heroin addict and you went to summer camp, you would know it. So that's why I like to call it a habit. And habits are okay. We can have good habits in our life, but we can also have habits that are problematic. I'm interviewed all the time by magazines like Glamour and Ladies' Home Journal and the New York Times, and about how people can reduce their use of the internet or television. So I do have advice on that kind of thing. When I talk about internet and computers, I just presume, the gaming can get involved in there. And I first wrote on video games more than 20 years ago using the term flow, which was coined by Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, who was my dissertation advisor and who I wrote my first book with. And who's partly responsible for some of these early findings I had in my career. And flow describes intense experience in a game, or a game of tennis, or writing a symphony, or practicing a musical instrument, or rock climbing, or anything where there's a challenge that is fairly high and a skill level that you can bring to it which is equally high and that you can do. The contrary would be that you're playing tennis and you're playing against the best player in the world, and so your challenge is really high and your skill is really low and you experience anxiety. From the point of view of the tennis player, he's bored because his challenge is really low and his skill level is super high. So, and if you've ever played tennis or chess or certain kinds of games, you need to find someone whose skill level is almost at the same level. What's so great about video games, and there are a lot of really good things about video games, and it's one of the reasons that they come close to being addicting for some people. Tetris in particular, I mean, is the historic champion of these games, is that the challenge level often goes up with your ability. I mean, I first noticed that playing Asteroids 30 years ago. And it knows just where you're at. And of course, not that too many people get into flow taking the SAT or the GRE. Those tests now are given that way. The downside is you'll hear parents, mothers more than fathers, say, you know, my kid would not come down and eat. He would stay up there and starve playing a particular video game. And it's very hard to pull your kid away, still am a parent. And one of the reasons simply is, how do you pull the kid away? He's in the middle of a multiple-use game with other kids in Romania and China, and he can't let his team down. How do you pull him away from the game? I mean, you have to kind of intravenously feed the little guy. One thing I tell parents of younger children, and it really works remarkably well, kids are a funny little species, is that you can set like a kitchen timer and say, okay, you know, Fred, no one's called Fred anymore, or Frederica, you've got 15 minutes more to play Super Mario 3. And you set the kitchen timer on there. Guess what happens? If the mother comes in, or father, over and over again and says, okay, you got to stop, kid doesn't stop, doesn't listen to the mother. Sets the timer goes off, the kid goes, oh, we're supposed to stop. I mean, doesn't think that the mother set the timer, actually gives the timer more power than the mother had. So there are little tricks you can do. I mean, I've suggested for years to families that they sit down together and say, okay, maybe we're all watching too much TV. And it is a familial habit. It's like if you've ever smoked cigarettes. Very hard to stop smoking if your spouse or your girlfriend or boyfriend or somebody's smoking. Same thing with families. I mean, one person might want, I get letters from around the country and sometimes around the world. I got one from a woman not long ago. She said, I'm going to leave my marriage and my kids. I mean, everybody, all they do is watch football on the weekend. We never do anything together. I want to get outside and do some things. I can do some things by myself, but I want to do things as a family. My husband's not on my side. And is there someone who can treat television addiction in a family? Well, I wrote back there and I said, look, I don't think really the problem is television. I think there's other stuff going on with your family. I think you guys ought to see a family counselor, and like, don't jump ship with your family yet. And be careful what advice you take from me, because I'm not a licensed therapist. But these problems, I mean, when I get this stuff published, Brazil's been a place where I get more reporter questions than any place, because there the telenovela, their soap opera, is so huge that they make us look like we don't watch that much TV here. A family might list out all the activities they could do together besides the internet and besides TV that they might enjoy doing together. Go for a walk, play a board game, plan out a summer vacation, maybe go over an old family album and one that was before digitization and reconstituted, or maybe begin to tell the story of your family genealogically and research it. I mean, you can come up with a family project. I don't know. There could be 30 things a family could come up with, each taking different amounts of time and being different. And then you put, with a magnet, you put them on the refrigerator. I always tell people, don't put it with a magnet on the TV, because it'll mess up the TV. And then reflexively, a great and high percentage of American families, as soon as dinner's over, if they're not already watching TV during dinner, which is very common, They start to watch TV as soon as dinner's over. They don't even, I would say probably the majority of American families don't even have a dinner hour anymore. But they might reinstitute the dinner hour and then say, okay, what are we going to do after dinner? Instead of reflexively, automatically going and watching TV, you go over to that list on the refrigerator and say, okay, before we pick a TV show, we're going to look at this and see if there's something else, just to try and break the thing. The other thing you can do is, I'm still a advisor to the TV turnoff people, and it's not that I think that everyone should throw out their TV. I don't. I think there's great stuff on TV, but I think that people can reduce their viewing, and I think it's very helpful for a family to consider stopping viewing altogether for like a week. Just a week, see what it's like, see how the family reconstitutes itself after a week. Most of the time people will go sort of back on it or go back to doing it, but they might find, oh my God, it was so much fun to just laugh and play a game on the floor together.